what I found, having met with a few real estate agents, is unfortunately not a lot of them understood the investment piece. I just started thinking, hey, I could probably do this, and I could probably do it in sort of a different way than maybe other people. So that's sort of how I became enamored with real estate.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Team Leader Academy podcast. It's Joe Herrera coming to you live from Las Vegas, and we are live on a couple of different Facebook channels, and then obviously this will be posted later, available to listen or view on podcast or YouTube. So I'm so excited today. One of my favorite collaboration partners in the world, at least in the Southwest United States, Isabelle Stonebaker is with us. So Isabelle, welcome. Thanks for hopping on with me.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me. I'm so happy to be here.
So tell everybody, who is Isabelle? Like, what is your background? What is your, I know a lot about you, but from your, I kind of do this thing, this origin story, superpower, kryptonite type thing. But so how did you get into the real estate space? You know, you practice in somewhat of an unconventional way as far as most traditional real estate agents are used to hearing about. So how did you get into real estate? Like, what was your path that led you there?
Yeah, so I was actually an accountant for 7 years before I got into real estate. And probably like a lot of people, I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. So I remember as I was sort of working this job where accountants make money by billing themselves out hourly. And so I had done this for years and years and years. And I had sort of gotten to the point where I began to believe life was just a series of trade-offs, that you could maybe choose 3 important things in your life: family, fitness, friends, financial security, career, religion, whatever. You could pick 3 important things in your life, and that maybe you could have 3, right? And I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and it ended up being this massive paradigm shift for me, where all of a sudden I thought, well, look, if you can make money a different way, potentially, like, you wouldn't have to have your life just be a trade-off. It wouldn't always be just time for money, time for money, time for money. You could potentially structure it in a different way and have a totally different life. And I was so enamored with the idea that I had my husband read it. We spent our 20s like walking around thinking about it. So long story short, we thought, well, we're going to do this. We met with a real estate agent and told him just everything that we were thinking and what we were trying to do. And sure enough, the next day he texted us some deals. And we took a look at the deals and we were sort of like, these are the worst. And this was like in 2008, 2009. Like, the market was really low. Like, literally every house was a deal. And so I think what was happening was he was just trying to double side a couple of his transactions. He's like, here's the things I have, you know? But we were looking for specific returns and sort of like a pretty tight buy box. And it was clear that either we thought, well, maybe he didn't really understand what we were trying to do. You know, at any rate, what I found, having met with a few real estate agents, is unfortunately not a lot of them understood the investment piece. And I just started thinking, hey, I could probably do this, and I could probably do it in sort of a different way than maybe other people. So that's sort of how I became enamored with real estate. I got into it with the idea that I loved investing and that I would probably love to help investors. And the first 5 or 6 years of my career was really about that. Helping home buyers buy, helping home sellers sell, but really priding myself on, hey, I am a great agent for investors. I understand what they're trying to do. And honestly, like, I made tons of investors a lot of money, and I was really, really proud of that. And it wasn't until later in my career that I really started to wrap my brain around, hey, you're making like lots of your clients great money, and that is something to be proud of. But you could also, in concert with that, make your family money, create a legacy around real estate. And so I would say that, gosh, my last 3 years in real estate have really been about that, about, hey, what does it look like if you're in real estate, you're a great practitioner of real estate, but also what if you just had a different vision for your family and your career? that was very much around wealth building and creating passive income. What did that look like?
Well, and I think that that's really interesting. You hit on a couple of things there that I think are important. So I talked a couple of days ago, had a gentleman from Denver on, and we talked about the barrier of entry into real estate is so low, but the barrier of success is so high. And so the reason why most real estate agents don't know how to invest or help people to invest is because literally that's not the purpose of real estate school, right? It's almost like our public education system. We're like, why don't these kids learn about investing or tax strategies or whatever? And it's just like, well, that's not the function of the public education system. The public education system is like not even financial literacy, just literacy, like get people to read. And so, yeah, in the real estate space, how on earth could someone become a great investment advisor or investor themselves without mentorship and guidance to get them there? So are you pretty self-taught? I mean, I know you and I run in the same circles with Brett and the Be Wealthy group, but like prior to coming to Brett, were you still executing, just like taking your financial knowledge and accompanying that with real estate and saying like, all right, these numbers make sense on a spreadsheet? Like, did you have a mentor? How did you begin to take down deals and know how to structure them in a way that made financial sense?
No, that's a really good question. So Joe's talking about Brett Tanner. Both of us have been fortunate enough to learn from him. He's brilliant guy. Prior to coaching with Brett and having him mentor me for many years, I would say like I understood the concept of return on investment, and I understood the concept of just sort of looking at something and being able to analyze a return.
Yeah.
But what I would say that he really did for me that has been a game changer over the course of the last like 3 to 5 years is I remember there was a day where I was sort of chatting with him and I was discouraged about something that had happened in my business. And one of the things he showed me, he pulled up a compound interest calculator and he was sort of like, all right, well, what's your net worth today? And I told him what it was. And he said, let's just look at this. Let's just look at what you're doing compounds over 10 years or 20 years. And he pulled it up and it's this astronomical number, right? And he's like, well, maybe you don't feel so bad now, right? Like when you look at your day sort of granularly and you look at like what happened that was encouraging or discouraging, I think sometimes you can go, well, I'm right in the muck. But if you look at it like, hey, what if I had a plan and executed that plan based on where I'm at over a period of time, you can be in a totally different position than you ever thought would be possible. So specifically, one of the things that he helped me with years and years ago was to build a wealth plan. I think not just agent, but I think every person should personally have this. Like, what is the outcome that I would love to have for myself 10 years from now, 20 years from now, if all sort of went according to plan? And I've just built out, hey, what would happen if I acquired something like one property a year? What would my financial outcome be? How could my life be different? And what would my passive income be? So I built this thing, sent it over to Brett. He took a look at it and was sort of like, hey, this is good, but I think you're selling yourself way, way short. He's like, over 20 years, you could actually have, a big outcome, a game changer, like a legacy building outcome. Why don't you redo this? Give it back to me and show me what it looks like if you built a plan to $50 million. And I was like, okay. So so I take it back. I rebuild the entire thing. As I'm filling it out, I just truthfully, I'm thinking to myself, hey, this seems really unrealistic. This is a really aggressive plan. But I'm a good little student, never want to let anybody down. So I give it back to him and he's like, okay, good job, gold star. And I tell you what, in building the plan, I began executing the plan. It's funny, just in that sometimes our brain needs to be shown the way. And at the time I was building it, I did not think that it was necessarily possible for me. but step one was possible. So I was like, oh, I'll just do step one,
Yeah.
and then the next year, step two was possible. So I went and did step two. And it's funny, like, if you design almost anything in life, you can begin to work on it piece by piece by piece. And I think the thing that's so interesting is if you have no plan, you probably actually will get nowhere. But with a plan, even one that you're like, this is really aggressive, I'm not sure how you ever do it, you just start working on it. You might be amazed what you actually could accomplish over a period of time,
Well, and I think there's that point that nothing ever really gets created physically before it's created mentally, spiritually, whatever, right? Like everything is created. That is the whole secret to the secret, right? It's the power of positive thinking. They almost teach it as like magically, if you want a Ferrari's going to show up. But I think what you're talking about is much more strategic in that if you say to yourself, I'm going to own 500 properties in 20 years, in order to do that, I need to acquire about 50 properties per year, so 25 properties per year. And those 25 properties per year, I'm going to start by doing 12 on year one. And then by the end, I'm going to be acquiring 40. So it all averages out. Let me go get one home a month. That's totally that you build that out mentally. You build the framework in a virtual mental state. And then your world begins to align around that goal. I think so many of us are afraid to set goals, not because we don't want the desired outcome, but because we don't want the required work. So how do you manage your goals so that they're so big that the desired outcome is that legacy, but they're not so intimidating that the required work like drowns out? Somebody said, Isabelle, such a amazing example of running a successful organization all while maintaining quality family time. So how do you set massive goals without sacrificing, like you've got kids, I've got kids, like that is the most important time is when they're young. I read yesterday that by the time your kid becomes 18, you're going to have spent 93% of all the days you're going to spend with them or spent those first 18 years. So how do you manage those two things?
So I think this is the question, right? And for me, I found that the answer involves not necessarily thinking about it in such a grand way. If you say, well, what I want to own 500 rental properties, and you think of it in terms of 500, I think that's very difficult. But when you actually have a plan that breaks it down into, well, I just have to acquire a property, maybe one a month, then your brain can actually wrap itself around, hey, I'm just acquiring one property a month. Well, how would I find a great deal? Well, how would I fund a great deal? And then in between that, you think about what does a win look like every day? So for me, where I'm looking at trying to really balance having a robust family life and trying to create a financial legacy and trying to also have like a great team with great culture and nurturing the people who are in our organization, as I look at that as a whole picture, one of the things that I personally look at is just time blocks, right? So we all hear about time blocking, but not many of us think of time blocking in terms of like, hey, when am I time blocking for my kids? When am I specifically taking my little boy out to lunch? When am I specifically doing something with my daughter? So I block that in to make sure it's always sort of in the mix. And then same thing with wealth building. So within my calendar, there are times each day where I'm analyzing deals, where I'm looking at building our portfolio, where I'm looking at what needs to happen in order to get properties that we've acquired to their final end goal in terms of what we were hoping to do with them. So I think you actually can have more of the things that you want by setting a budget in terms of like, how much of my day do I think I want to spend on this? And how big of a priority is it?
So I'm reading a book, and I've talked about it quite a bit. It's called Exactly What to Say. It was written by Phil Jones. He's amazing. He just talks about, it's a phenomenal book. He talks about the worst time to think about what you're going to say is when you need to say it. But there's almost, you could apply that principle in the same way to a purpose-driven life. Like the worst time to figure out how you're going to spend time with your kids is when you're running out of time with your kids. The worst time to think about how you're going to build a wealth plan is when like you're on your heels trying to pay your bills. There is something to that purpose-driven action moving forward to say, I'm not going to go, oh crap, it's Thursday night, I have nothing to do, let me take my daughter to get ice cream. I'm going to go ahead of time and say, all right, here's what my schedule looks like for the next week. I haven't spent enough time with Joni. I'm going to take her to go get ice cream on a Thursday night. Hey, Joe, it's Thursday night, me and you, ice cream. It's in my calendar, it's set. And now I've protected that time, but I've been purposeful about it.
100%. And your
You're
kids
not going to
know when they're going to see you, what that's going to look like. And I think there actually is something about a predictable routine. Like my kids always know they're going to have dinner with me. They know the days that we have time set aside to spend together. There isn't really a question about, hey, when am I going to see you next? You know?
Yeah. Well, and I think that same thing applies obviously to property acquisition, to team building, to deal evaluation. Like you've read Organize Tomorrow Today. I think Brett gave us that book. It's just a great book. It's like, what are the 3 things I'm going to accomplish today? And if I have a little bit of time left over, what are the next most important things I'm going to fit into my day? And it's so much of our successes can be built on just pure talent. Like somebody's just talented, so opportunities come their way. But as far as creating the type of wealth and opportunity you're talking about, it has to be done in a purposeful way. So when Leilani reached out and said, hey, what are we going to be talking to Isabelle about? I said, I want to talk about how you defeat the iBuyer by becoming an iBuyer.
Okay, I like that.
That's kind of, I mean, I don't know that I would say what Taylor does or what you do is quote unquote iBuyer, but it's the same principle of like my wife, she's not going to watch this, so I'm safe. But as soon as my wife uses something, it almost loses all value to her. So like if we have a dresser in our bedroom that we've had for 20 years that we paid a lot of money for, in her mind, every year it goes from $1,000 to $500 to $250 to $125.
Appreciate it.
By the end, it's just completely worthless.
Yeah.
And so we had this argument, quote unquote, where like we had this armoire in our bedroom and it had a few nicks on the sides and whatever. It was kind of like a antique to, back when we used to do that stuff. And so it was like a year ago and she's like, I want to get rid of this thing. And I was like, all right, cool. I'm going to put it on offer. And she's like, well, nobody's going to want it. And I was like, somebody's going to want this thing.
Yep.
And so I kind of entered into a little bet with her. I think I sold the thing for $150 in like 23 minutes on OfferUp. But the point that I learned was because she had used it, because she had dinged it up, in her mind, it lost all value.
Yeah.
We could either try to fix the world's problems of used goods and their true authentic value, or we could realize there's certain people who have had a little bit of water damage in their property, who have smoked in it, who like have peed on the floors, like who just for them, they're like, yeah, this thing I paid $100,000. I know it's worth $250. No one's going to pay me $250 for it. Man, if I could just get like $150, I'd be so happy. I wouldn't have to show it. I wouldn't have to get pictures. So that is the iBuyers, OfferPad, all these guys, they're not trying to solve the problem of putting mass amounts of wealth into the home seller's pocket. They are literally solving the need of, I don't want to sell my home traditionally. Who will give me cash for it? And so people like you and I and Taylor, we get into that world and go like, all right, well, we're not about trying to swindle people. We're just realizing that there are people for whom they smoked in their house for 5 years. And in their mind, they just want to get out of this stupid thing. And they don't even want to go through the hassle of dealing with the retail side of real estate. So in what ways are you competing with the OfferPads of the world, or are you completely staying out of their buy box?
So this is an amazing question. Like, ultimately, to your point, I think there's always a seller who is better served for whatever reason by not having people walk through their home, right? Either they have a time frame that's incredibly short where they're like, hey, I need cash in 2 weeks, and the MLS just isn't great for that, or the house is very damaged and they do not have money to fix it, and the idea of being asked for some repairs is just not going to be great. Like, there are a variety of people who just need simple, right? And they thought about it and they're like, it might be worth taking a discount in order to just get a more simple process. So that's what like the seller that we're ultimately typically dealing with or looking for. And
well,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, real estate agents kind of struggle with this concept, but if they'll get granular and they'll go, remember that time that you were buying an Escalade and you owned a, like a Audi SUV, and you knew that you could probably sell that thing for 45, but when you showed up to the Cadillac dealer, they're like, hey, we'll give you 36 and you don't have to mess with it. You knew you could have got $9,000 more, but the hassle to you was not worth $9,000. And so there is that. So yeah, time, be it embarrassment, be it whatever. Like, there are people who realize, like, I could go through the MLS route. It would take more time and give me more money, but I'm not willing to sacrifice the time for the little bit more money or the hassle or the embarrassment or whatever. And so I think real estate professionals struggle with this idea until they get granular enough to go like, oh, I remember I bought that electric mountain bike for $6,000. And I knew that if I listed it and had 20 people come look at it, I might get $5,200, but my buddy's going to give me $4. And so here, just take my bike. I don't want to mess with it. And if you then take that on a really high level, that's exactly the world that Taylor and you play in to some degree, is people who are just like, yeah, it's not worth me wasting a bunch of time to try to get more money. Just how much will you give me cash and I'll be out in a week.
Oh yeah, 100%. And when you realize that there are people who want to sell in that way, the whole game changes, right? Like, I think a very interesting question becomes, hey, what happens if I could buy 2 properties a year at a 50% discount, right? Like, if there are 2 people, only 2 that I can find that are looking for that specific scenario, then I can actually acquire twice as many houses as somebody who's just going and buying things off the MLS, right? And I think that's where the conversation becomes really, really interesting. It's what the iBuyers have figured out. It's what most people who have investment companies have figured out. They figured out, hey, if I can figure out who really wants to sell and would be interested in selling at a discount in exchange for convenience, then ultimately your ability to acquire properties for less money than the average person goes way, way up, right? And if you can systematize around this is where potentially you're doing the same thing as what an iBuyer is doing, right? So Open Door came to our area, probably 12 months ago. They dropped mail on me. They dropped radio ads on me. They were specifically farming our neighborhood, looking for people.
And you're in Prescott, right?
Yeah, we're in Prescott Valley. So we have a site-built house in a nice little, like, homogeneous neighborhood, which is exactly what OfferPad looks for, Open Door looks for. They love neighborhoods that are with very similar houses that they can easily value, right? So they're going hard after our neighborhood. And I'm, of course, riveted because I love looking at different campaigns, thinking, all right, the conversion rate on this or whatever. What's interesting is the neighborhoods we buy in, we do something so similar. So when we're buying, I actually love to buy in an entry-level neighborhood. So from an investment standpoint, like, what I like investing in manufactured housing on owned land. And the reason I love that is because I find that the entry point is quite low. So I can easily buy a house for, say, $70,000, put $10,000 to $15,000 into it, and then get a house at the end that rents out for $1,500 a month. So for me, almost everything that I'm doing is going to be a true 1% rule or higher, right? And very few people in the last 10 years have been able to find that. I can't tell you how many investors I've talked to have said, well, the 1% rule is really dead. You can't find that anymore. And I'm like, oh, really? Let me tell you about something that I'm doing. But the key is you have to buy the house fully depreciated. You have to have a direct conversation with the seller. You've got to have somebody who's sort of willing to take that discount in exchange for the convenience and the service of having cash quick, right? Yeah. But we do specifically send mail to entry-level neighborhoods with the idea of, hey, there is somebody in this neighborhood who's going to want to sell, who we can offer our services to, that then we'd be able to buy the house and put it in our portfolio. So it's the same concept as what Open Door is doing, what OfferPad's doing. It's the same concept. I don't know how many of your listeners are familiar with the hedge funds and what the hedge funds are doing right now, but lots of hedge funds across the country are also buying entry-level housing with the idea that over time, it's going to be an amazing investment. So if you look at inflation over time, rents typically do go up. And so it is one of those things that you can do to protect yourself from inflation a little bit.
Right. Yeah, you're much better having your money parked in a real property secured asset that appreciates than a stock that's or your bank account. Like I keep beating myself up for money sitting in our bank accounts that's just losing money. So let me ask you this, or losing value. I think your superpower is human connection. Like you and I have been together quite a bit, and I think you're really good at connecting with people. But when you evaluate yourself, I mean, you're running a massive wholesale business. You do have a retail arm as well. What would you say is your greatest strength? Like what is your superpower?
So I think my superpower is replicate and duplicate. So if somebody gives me a good idea, I have no ego in it. I'm like, all right, tell me how to do that. You know, and I'll get all the details on it and I can implement it pretty much like to the T within 24 hours. And I actually think if you look at lots of people with big businesses that are sort of cruising, almost none of them are really running like these amazing original ideas. What they are doing is they're getting around other people that have incredible ideas. They're able to sort of recognize what about what the other person is doing is working and then quickly replicate it and turn it around. So almost all the things I do in my business are a copy of somebody else. And I recognize that I'm blessed by it.
Yeah. And wouldn't you say that the obsession over unique ideas is a loser's game? Like it just seems like there's probably so many people who are stuck not executing because they don't want to, like they want to create something unique. And trust me, like our world has been blessed by it. But for the most part, everything created is an iteration upon a creation, right? Like there's billion-dollar companies that exist because of the advent of the wheel or the advent of the steam-powered engine or the advent of the internal combustion engine and now the advent of the electric motor. And like there's not so many people give Elon Musk credit for the creation of Tesla. He didn't even create Tesla. Like that's the best part. And so I just think it's cool that you recognize that being a superpower is the ability to evaluate, replicate, duplicate. Like,
you tell me a good idea, I will do it tomorrow. No ego, awesome. You know, like I think there's just something to be said about if something is working and it's working really well for someone else and they're willing to share it with you, why wouldn't you go put it into practice tomorrow if you know it works, you know?
Yeah. So what then would you say is a weakness? What's something you're working on that you're like, man, if I could really get better at this thing, it would help create wealth for myself. It would help advance the lives of the agents I work with. Like, what is your weakness that you're trying to improve upon?
It's a really good question. So right now, I would say the number one thing that I'm working on day in and day out is consistent accountability across the board for all our people. So we do provide them with feedback in terms of like, hey, here's the conversations you've had, that sort of thing. But what I'm working on specifically this quarter is really helping people tie that back into their incomes, right? So, hey, you've had 15 conversations based on the goals that you've told me that you want to hit. Realistically, you need to have 25, you know? And historically, I've been big on, hey, you need to have 25 conversations. You need to have 25 conversations, you know, like, like sort of repeating it, but not necessarily like going back and saying, hey, you know, you're 10 conversations off, right? You know that ultimately you're doing enough work to cause yourself some amount of pain, but not the pleasure of hitting your goal, right?
So you're getting deep in saying, and I think that's cool. Like as a standard, your team has had a 25 conversation requirement.
Yep.
And you probably have held people accountable to the team standard, but now digging deep to get granular enough to say, like, forget about the team standard. Here's how your lack of execution and hitting these goals is going to affect forget about our outcome. This is how it's going to affect your finances, your life, your freedom, your financial growth is all going to be affected. And tying those two things together, I think, is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, fundamentally, I care very deeply that all the people in our organization make great money. And ultimately, if you're doing enough to make only 75%, say, of what it was that you wanted to make, that's not an epic life, right?
Right.
So if you wanted to make $250,000 for some reason and you make 175, it's not like 175 is a bad outcome, right? But there may still have been something that you wanted in that last 75,000 that now you can't have. It might be the difference between buying an investment property or not. It may be the difference between actually being able to take your family on vacation or not, right? Like, ultimately, if you hit a goal and you're not doing 100% of what you need to do in order to hit that goal, it still is a failure in that you didn't live the level of life that you wanted to.
Well, and when you get kind of gangster with that, there are people who probably accidentally achieve their goal, but they know they didn't put in the work required to do it. And that in and of itself becomes an empty attainment. Like I told my team, I took my family last October, we went on a Disney cruise. Mm-hmm. We own a travel agency, and so we get discounted Disney cruises. So the financial cost wasn't much, but what ultimately affected me was I wasn't sacrificing enough dietarily to earn the right to eat like a maniac on the cruise. So like I noticed myself on the cruise, I just wasn't happy. And I'm like, because this isn't a vacation. Like I didn't have to work.
Now normal life.
I didn't have to work hard to get it. I didn't discipline myself so that it was like, well, I'm having, 3 donuts this morning. That's cool. I have 3 donuts every morning. Not really, but you know what I mean? Same principle.
No, I know exactly what
so it's like you can achieve a goal. And if you didn't pay the price to get the goal, even the achievement is going to feel cheap. So it's like,
I think this is an insidious thing about real estate in some ways, right? That every once in a while, you do get a reward for doing nothing, right? Like a family or friend falls out of the air, you get a big deal you probably shouldn't have gotten based on your efforts. And because of that, sometimes it actually reinforces the wrong behaviors. And I think this is actually one of the reasons it becomes really important to make sure that you actually are actively monitoring, hey, what am I doing in my business? And is that creating an outcome I want? Because not always are you going to get lucky, right? And you don't ever want to bank on a business model that's sort of like, I get lucky every third week,
Well, and that's what I always preach, the combination of luck and sphere of influence. It's not a business model. Like if your SOI exists because your significant other is the director of the teachers union and you have a direct line to teacher orientation, that is not sphere of influence. That's a business model. But there are people who are just like, I wait for my friends to call me. And I'm like, that may have worked over the last couple of years when your friends are selling and upgrading every 18 months. But in the future, it will not. That's not a business model because your friends will dry up. And guess what else will happen? Other friends will get in the real estate industry. So it's like the combination of luck and sphere of influence, I think, has ruined great entrepreneurship because the barrier of entry into real estate is so low. You may benefit from it for a couple of years by going like, I don't know, I never really built a business, but I closed a bunch of deals. Well, guess what? Because that barrier of entry is so low, the next friend in your friend group, the next person that goes to the gym with somebody, the next, the next couples group, dinner people are going to get their real estate license. And all of a sudden you're going to go, I don't know where my sphere of influence went. And even worse, you're going to have people like me who my superpower is lead generation. So we meet with agents all the time and they're like, I don't know where my sphere of influence went. It's really dried up over the last couple of years. And I'm like, well, we've got almost 150,000 people of a 2 million person city in our database. So we've got like, almost 10% of the entire city in our database. What do you think the chances are that your friends are sitting in our database because I ran an ad and they ended up with our agents?
100%.
Even more gangster than that, we've had agents at our company who are not running any type of lead generation. They're not really working their sphere of influence. They're just hoping that people show up, who've called me and been like, bro, your team sold 4 of my friends and sphere of influence homes over the last 12 months because they clicked on an ad you ran on Facebook. And I'm like, well, then just don't rely. You can't rely on them. Your business model is not a business model. It's relying upon luck, which is super duper dangerous.
Well, the other piece of that I think is so important is even if you're running like a legit sphere model, it is very unlikely that you will have double the family and friends next year that you have this year. So What happens if you ever want to double your business? Like sometimes I just look at it and I'm like, what would happen if I wanted to change my life in 6 months? Ultimately, if I want to double my lead gen efforts, I can do that. I can drop twice as many mail pieces and we can have
you could just spend twice as much money. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, exactly. You can run twice as many Facebook ads. The trouble with family and friends is I'm just at a loss for how you're going to have double as many true family and friends.
That's such a great point.
So
that's such a great point. I hope people heard that. Well, Isabelle, listen, I'm grateful for your collaboration. I love picking your brain and seeing what you're working on. I have so much respect for your ability to connect with people, and then coupling that with like a crazy, in a good way, like a hyper analytical brain from a numbers and execution standpoint. And it creates this really unique individual who most of the people I know that are great with numbers and analytics are not great with people, but you're great with both. And it's so awesome to have you in our world and to be somebody that I'm happy to, Taylor and I consider you a friend, and we look up to you so much in so many ways. So thanks for hopping on with us.
Same way. No, it's been lovely to chat. And if anyone wants to reach out, I'm more than happy to answer any questions. So I think, dissimilar maybe to other people right now, I actually think this is one of the better opportunities that we're going to have over the next 5 years. I just think anytime things are shifting, there are these little opportunities that open up that you go, oh, now's the time to run. I see it. And I think it's really exciting. So.
Well, and I've always been puzzled by mortgage lenders who rely solely upon refinance. And I've also been puzzled by mortgage lenders who rely solely upon residential resale mortgages. So in the same vein, I'm puzzled by agents who are purely retail. And to some degree, I'm puzzled by agents who are purely wholesale. I'm puzzled by agents who aren't getting into mortgage and title. I'm puzzled by agents who aren't building ancillary products. And obviously we've talked a lot. Taylor and I moved into a revenue share model. Like I'm puzzled by agents who aren't leveraging their network for residual income. Because for me, when the last recession hit, Taylor and I had a retail business. That was it.
Yeah.
Luckily we survived. So as this new financial challenges hit, I was like, dude, I'm so grateful. We have like 20 different ways we're attacking this thing, because even if half of them go completely flat, I'm still going to be able to feed my family and stay on track for my financial future. And then as some more come online. And so to your point, wholesale, I think, is a great opportunity right now. Resale, is staying somewhat strong, but it's different. And so it's like, you've got to have your hand in a bunch of different things in order to achieve your financial goals. Because over 20 years, you laying your plan out with Brett, there was no way to just say like, everything's going to stay the exact same for 20 years. You're pivoting and changing and learning and growing, and the market's changing and shifting, and you're making adjustments. And so I think it's such a smart way that you are practicing your business is ran, because you're not a one-trick pony. Like you're always trying and iterating, from multiple angles, which I think is brilliant.
I was just thinking the same thing about you this morning.
Awesome. All right, Isabelle.
It's going to be legacy level wealth, which is fabulous.
I love it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure. Have a good one.